Hey, and thanks for tuning in. Adam from NiagaraMods here, and in this video, I'll be taking you through what's new in Reflow 1.5. This is one of our biggest builds yet, and there are a ton of new features that are not only going to help you build really engaging and exciting experiences for your customers, but should also add a ton to the quality of life and your productivity as you're using Reflow. We're really excited about this one, and we'll go through each section in this video, each system in Reflow step by step. You'll find time codes and links to sections in the bottom on the video description on YouTube. We'll also put those time codes down there, and you should be able to skip to different chapters in the scrub bar below. Okay, to get started here, I've got a station loaded up, have added some content to it already, and we'll be using this throughout the video here to demonstrate all the new features. And first one on our list are buildings. So buildings in 1.5 have changed quite a bit, both for end users and for configuration. So diving first into end user changes, you can see here we've got our standard map at the top, and not much has changed there. But if you look below that, you'll see that we've got new cards on the building's index page. And these new cards can show a lot more data, and they look a lot more modern than the previous releases of Reflow, where we were just showing a picture with a name. With these cards, we show a picture still in the circle, but around that circle, we've got status information. So if you've set a building status, that will appear in the color that you've set for the status in this little dot, as well as around the border of the picture. We also show if the building has active alarms in the top right, and then we show the number of floors and devices for each building. Of course, clicking on a building will take you to the buildings page. One of the biggest new features for buildings in 1.5 are groups, and you may have noticed over here I've already got a few groups created. Groups are going to allow you to combine buildings into campuses, and because you can infinitely nest groups, you could then take a group of buildings that you've turned into a campus and then put those into another group for a region or something like that. So lots of flexibility as to how they work. To get started and to create a group, there's a new button down here to add a group. I've already got 3 added, but I'll add another one for our Midwest buildings. So I can just click to create a group and just created 2 there, but we'll just edit this one. We'll call it Midwest. And then you can also assign a photo to it. Typically, you could pick a building to represent, an overhead shot, maybe from Google Maps or something like that. Or if you leave it blank, we'll just use the first 2 letters in its photo here. So I'll leave that blank so you can see what that would look like. And then I'll delete that other group that I created. Okay, so we've got our 4 groups, and I'll just start moving buildings into the groups. You can see I just need to click and drag right on top of the group. So I've got my Raleigh, New York, and Atlanta branch and East Coast. I want to put San Francisco and LA and West Coast. Dallas and Houston will go to Gulf Coast. And Chicago and Detroit will go to the Midwest branch. And you can see that as I'm doing this, groups are starting to happen in our buildings index page. So now all of the buildings are grouped, and groups load in as cards, similar to those building cards. Groups can have a photo. In the Midwest one that I just added, it's just using the first 2 initials here, MI, and showing it in the circle here. And then below the photo and the name, we've got a building count along with thumbnails for each building, and those thumbnails can be clicked to access the specific building directly from there. When I click on a group, I'm just going to get scrolled to a list of buildings in that group. And if I've got multiple groups, so let's say I want to add another group, we'll call it South. And I want to pull that group into our East Coast and put Raleigh and Atlanta into that group. You can see that now East Coast has New York because it's directly under East Coast. A subgroup called South, and Raleigh and Atlanta are under that. One other thing to note here in the buildings index page is our cards on our map have been updated to work with our new building cards. So you'll see that same style with status, indicator, and border, as well as circle, photo, name, and number of floor and devices there. The other thing that groups will affect are your building dropdown. So you can see here we've got our East Coast / South for our Raleigh and Atlanta branch, our East Coast here for the New York branch, West Coast for, and so on and so forth. So you can see that we take advantage of those groups in the nav. And then if we take a look at mobile, the same thing will happen here. If we look under buildings, we've got all of our buildings separated by group in the nav right there. Next up, we'll be looking through the new equipment features in 1.5. So first I want to show you my current setup. In this station, I've got a whole bunch of devices pulled in and assigned to buildings, and we'll be using those to demonstrate the new equipment groups feature. So equipment groups are essentially systems. They're groups of different types of devices onto a single view for your users. So if you needed to build an air system, chilled water system, or hot water system, you would be able to pull in things like boilers and pumps and pipes into a single unified view where you can add data and give the user a nice view into an entire system. To get started, I'm going to go to Add Equipment Group. And you can think of this similar to an equipment type. We'll be building an air system for our lobby in our New York branch office. So we'll get started by calling this air system, and then I'll add a new air system, and we'll call that lobby air system. Now groups are really simple. They just have an image that will be used when they're displayed in cards. And so for this air system, we'll just do a stock photo of an air handler there. And then we really just need to come in here and pick devices. So I'll select my New York branch, my device chooser. I'll pick the air handler and 3 of the VAVs. And you can see that just by selecting those 4 devices, we've got a graphic starting here. We've got cards with totals for each device type, and then each device type has a summary view. And these summary views are, they mirror equipment type summary views. So we've got a card or grid option, as well as a table option. And these will pull in by whatever defaults you have set for the equipment type. So if VAVs were defaulted to a table, that's how it would appear in equipment groups. These summaries have the exact same user interaction that you would expect. Users can still go in and customize points and things like that. What makes these groups very powerful, though, is the dashboard cards that you can add above these total cards. So you're able to add in more custom content to these views. And so I'll demonstrate that here. First, I want to pull in my air handler graphic, and that's under Building B, Air Handler 1. And I'll just set that to be a little larger on screen, a little more prominence. And then maybe I would want to come in here and add some Niagara point cards for some important points on the system. So I'll just go in here. I'll just add a couple. I'll grab my air handler point. And I'll just call it discharge air set point. And we'll give it an icon. And then I could duplicate this card and maybe show all of the space temperatures for my VAVs. I'll just add one here though. And browse for a thermometer. And link in the proper point. So you can see really quickly how well this starts to fill out and how this page feels very different from your standard equipment graphic. If we back out here, when I take a look into the air systems page, you now see a card for this lobby air system that we created with its thumbnail and a device count. And when I back all the way out to the main equipment page, you can see that just like our equipment types above it, air systems has its own entry here, along with a card for the lobby air system that we added. You can move and rearrange groupings just like equipment types in this menu to the left, and you can notice that our group will have a different icon next to it, whereas our equipment types have a little device icon. This is our little group icon here. Okay, also new in 1.5, let's take a look at some of the changes to device graphics. So I'm going to pull open my air handler. And you may notice right up here at the top, we've got an ORD picker. So highly requested feature from users is people wanted to be able to change the ORD of an existing device. And previous to 1.5, you would have had to delete this device and re-add it to change its ORD. So in 1.5, you can just do that from this drop down here. Or you can click the magnifying glass if you want a little bit of a larger view, and just pick a brand new device that this Reflow device is connected to in Niagara. So I'll demonstrate that by jumping over to Air Handler 2. And you may notice these new blue icons, Reflow icons next to our devices in our tree here. These mean that this device is already added in Reflow. So it's there to warn you that, if you select this device, it's already linked to another device somewhere else. It'll also help you know which devices you still need to pull in. And of course, this one is connected to Air Handler 2, but we're going to use it anyway. We'll hit OK. And we go into a point remap. So now we're going to remap all of those points on this device to the new ORD. So you can see we're going from AHU01 to AHU02. I'll just hit save. And now the device is completely remapped to Air Handler 2. I'll toggle that back though. You can see Air Handler 1 no longer has a Reflow icon because no device is using it in Reflow. I'll hit done. We'll go through the remap again. I'll hit save, and it's back to normal. The other area where we've given a lot more freedom and flexibility around selecting ORDs is in the points for a device. So if I jump into the points for this air handler, and I'll just expand zone and look at this space CO2 level. Currently it's connected to the corresponding point on the device itself. But now in 1.5, I can browse my station for any point that I'd like to connect it to. So I'll just dive into building A here, and I'll just grab the status point and bind that point in. You can see that because this point is external to the device ORD, we have this little external icon, and that's just reminding you that this point isn't on your device. It's somewhere else in the station, and you can see over here that it's switched over in the graphic. So really easy way to pull in points. Previously, you would have had to potentially make a proxy point on the device and link it in. So this should save a ton of time. Last thing I'll show you down here with device points is whenever I expand this point, notice that, and I'll expand a couple here, notice that these point cards now only expand to the size that they need to be. Previously, all of these points would have expanded to a uniform size, which would be the max size that we would need. So now we're taking up a lot less space in these menus, and that works great on desktop and is even more significant on mobile. The other thing to note is whenever I run an action that requires additional input, the form loads in from the bottom instead of moving left and right. Again, this cuts down on the vertical space that we need to take up with these forms. So much welcome improvement to point cards. And that will also happen on large cards. I just don't have them enabled on this graphic. Okay, back in our air handler, another really significant feature on device graphics is this attachments button here in the configuration. So attachments are going to allow you to pull in files and make them available to end users right on your graphic. You can pull in PDFs, Excel files, Word documents, image files, videos, can all be added through here. This has typically come from users asking to be able to attach a sequence of operation or a manual to the equipment, but you can use it to do a lot more, like maybe attaching a video of how to change a filter or something like that. So I'll just click Add a New Attachment. I'm going to browse my station file system for the attachment that I need. And remember, Reflow always uses the station file system for files. I'll call this one Sequence of Operation. Reflow's already selected a PDF icon because this is a PDF file, but I can customize that if I'd like. I can also customize the color of the icon. And once I've added that file, you can see that we've got an attachments button now up here at the top right. I can click on that and view my attachment. Thing to note here is that in my case, the PDF is loading in Google Chrome, which is how I've got my computer configured to work. And it's the default for most people. However, some users may have their computer set up to just download a file instead of opening it. They also may have it set up for a PDF to open in Acrobat Reader or some other type of PDF reader. So this feature will always provide the file to the user in their preferred way of browsing and viewing and downloading files in their web browser, which is a good thing. Okay, so next up we're going to be taking a look at one of my favorite new features in Reflow 1.5, the redesigned floor plan builder. So we've spent a lot of time getting this right and talking with users and trying to understand how they want to use the floor plan builder, and we've added just a ton of quality of life improvements and new features that should really change how you can build floor plans in Reflow, as well as how your users will work with them. So I'm just going to dive into my Raleigh branch here, and I've got 2 floors built already. We'll click into the first floor and go into Floor Plan Builder and just take a look at some of the new user interface elements here. So right away you'll notice that we've got a darker theme for the UI of the builder, and that's very intentional so we can help you separate builder UI from your floor plan content. Previously, when everything was white, it could be hard to distinguish content from UI and get things lined up properly. The other thing that you may notice is we've gotten rid of the floating toolbars. So up here we've got a solid toolbar for zoom and back. We've also got, we moved our elements to the right under a solid toolbar as well. And you may have experienced this in previous builds where as you would be working, you'd be down here and toolbars would sort of get over on top of elements and making it harder to select them. So I'll switch, zoom out here. Again, elements over here on the right, all of your insertion buttons here have been moved, still collapsible, so you can edit the canvas itself without all those extra panes open. Our panes, we've added a ton of things into canvas settings, and we'll sort of work through those here in just a minute. We've got a new layout options tab, and we'll go through each one of these as well here in the future. These apply to specific elements and allow you to set some options globally. And then another thing to note here is we've renamed the actions tab in our canvas settings to macros, and that's because we've got a new action tab down here in your elements. One other thing, in addition to being able to collapse, which has sort of always been a feature, you can also now completely resize your tool pane over here on the right. You can also make specific tabs larger as well. So this is super handy if you're editing an element with a long property pane and you want to be able to see everything at once instead of that sort of version where you have to scroll like this. So super helpful, you know, when you're working in the floor plan editor for a long time. It really lets you get things set up the way you need. Okay. Let's jump out of the first floor now. Let's look at the new canvas changes. And to demonstrate that, I want to show you the new canvas form when you first create a floor plan and the changes we've made there. And then we'll dive into some of the other options. So I'm going to create a brand new floor called the third floor. And I want to make sure I've got some equipment added to this. I think I've got some VAVs in my list that haven't been assigned, floors or buildings, so I'll just pick those. And now that I've got 5 devices, we can go in and go into our floor plan builder. So previously in 1.4, when you would create a new floor plan, you would really just have a single button telling you that you needed to add a canvas background image. And that still exists right here under the canvas image, and I can browse my station and find the floor that I want to add in as my background. And you'll see a preview of that over here on the right. Now I do have another option though. I have the option to just remove this canvas and never pick one. And if I uncheck the use canvas image size here, I can actually set a width and a height for my canvas. And we'll even maintain an aspect ratio for you. You can see that as I'm moving, my width, my height will also change, or I can uncheck this and set them independently here if I'd like. I'll move that back to 1200. Because because an image isn't required anymore, you can now set the canvas background color. And it starts on automatic, and generally you want to leave it on automatic unless you've got a really specific reason that you need a specific background color. Automatic is going to take advantage of future features in Reflow when we release dark mode for the entire system. If your background, your canvas color is set to be automatic, your canvas will change to a darker background in dark mode and remain a white background if a user's viewing it in light mode. You can specifically set light or specifically set dark if you want. You can, of course, also choose a custom background color, or you can choose transparent, which would also work well for when dark mode or custom themes come in and you want to match the background of the rest of Reflow. Last 2 other options here. If you have equipment associated and assigned to the floor, you'll see this option here. This option previously would have existed under the old Actions tab, or in 1.5, the new Macros tab, where you can insert labels for all devices. We've just added this here for convenience. It's auto-checked for you. If you leave this checked, we'll install or create labels in the canvas for all of the devices on the floor. So you can turn that on or off when you're creating the canvas. And then lastly, we've got this label size mode. And this is useful if you're using compact horizontal or vertical labels in your canvas on this floor plan. This means every label created, including those created with auto labels, will use this size mode. And so super helpful quality of life feature. You no longer need to create a label and then go set its size mode and move on to the next one and do the same thing over and over again. You're able to set a default at the beginning or anytime through the canvas pane settings over here. And Reflow will use that when it's creating new labels. So this is good. I won't use a background image. I will just have a white automatic background, and we'll create that canvas. Okay, so our canvas has been created. I can just sort of drag these labels into place. You can see they were created automatically because I left that check mark for auto labels on. And now if I go to the canvas settings, most of the things that I was changing or editing in that new canvas form are available here. Again, you can see we can change and set the width and height. We can choose whether or not we're maintaining aspect ratio. We can go in and add a canvas image after the fact, and we can also change the background color if we'd like. Another important change here, you'll notice this element scale. This was previously named canvas scale, but really what we found is, most users were using it to really control the sizing of their elements in relation to the image, and so we thought it made much more sense to call this sort of, what it is and how people use it, which is the element scale. So that's the same value, the same slider, just with a new name here. And then below that here, of course, you can change your default label size mode anytime you need right there. Now, one other thing I want to demonstrate that's a little different, if I do grab a canvas image here, and I'll just go into what's new, go to floors, grab this one. The image will automatically be sized to my canvas width and height, and it's going to fit without any distortion in the middle there. Now, if I go and I check use image size, my canvas size is automatically changed, and you can see that up here in the width and height to the size of the image, and you can see that now my labels are, probably need to be properly placed. And if I wanted, I could use element scale to sort of get them dialed into the right size that I want in relation to the floor plan there. I'll move that back to 100% though, and uncheck use image size. The other option, if you don't want to use the image size and change the actual dimensions of your canvas, you can fit the image to the canvas. Now, one thing to note here, this will cause skewing. So you want to make sure that your width and height are the proper aspect ratio to your image if you're using this option. Just to give you a quick example, if I change the height to something like 500 here, and I go to and I uncheck maintain aspect ratio, so put that back to 1600, and I fit my image, you can see it's fully skewed here. So we wanted to provide that for maximum flexibility for you, but just know that you may end up skewing images if you use that setting, and just make sure you know how to adjust the width and the height properly. Okay, next up, let's take a look at some of the additional quality of life features that we've added to the canvas and to elements specifically. So in Reflow 1.4, anytime you would try to select an image or an element rather, a label, image, zone, etc., you could only select one at a time. And with Reflow 1.5, you can hold down Shift and select multiple elements. And this is really cool and helpful in that not only can I select these elements and sort of move them around and make changes to them on the canvas, but I can also change their properties over here in the Properties tabs and the other tabs. So if I want to set all of them to use the secondary color for their accent, I'm able to do that. You'll also notice that in areas where you have different options, we'll just tell you how many of those elements are selected. And if you were to edit this, it would change all 5. It's just that currently all 5 do not have the same value. Also note that in some cases, you can't edit certain properties with multiple selection, and those will be completely disabled if that's the case, but that's few and far between, and for the most part, you'll be able to edit every single property for multiple elements at the same time. Also notice as I've got things selected over here, they all appear selected in the Elements pane, and when I use my context menu to right click, all of these things work with multiple elements. So if I were to duplicate here, we get all of them duplicated. If I press my delete key, they're all deleted. So a really helpful way to work across multiple groups of elements. Shift also works in the Elements tab, so I can shift click on each one of these. I can shift click again to unselect an item. All work sort of as you would expect. Okay, another thing that's different here, you'll notice in the Properties pane, and this is the case for all elements, you'll see they've always had a name, but we've also added position and size to this pane, and so you can now come in and just make sure that you've got everything sort of lined up perfectly. For instance, X734 here, this one seems to be a little off by a pixel. We can just bump that up 1, and now they're perfectly aligned there horizontally. Okay, next thing, and probably one of the most exciting features, is copy and paste. So previously, if you wanted to, you go into this element here and you make some changes. Say we want to change maybe the size mode. We've changed the color, maybe the font size of the value. And we wanted to, there really wasn't a way to apply this to everything. Now, of course, I could have multiple selected them and did it all at once, but when I'm coming back later, and that isn't an option, I can now right click and go to copy. And copy is going to allow me to pick any of the settings from these tabs up here and copy them and paste them on another label. So if I go to copy style and I right click on this label here, I can go to paste style, and you can see now it's formatted the exact same way. Huge time saver when you're working in floor plans, and you can do that over and over again. Now, copy and paste works between elements of the same type. Of course, if I had, let's say, a text element in here, I wouldn't be able to paste the style of a label on the text element. So, important thing to remember. You can, however, paste dynamic colors between elements. So if I had a dynamic color set up for this label and wanted to apply it to this text, as long as this text was also set to have a dynamic color, I would be able to copy that. And I'll just demonstrate that quickly here. So set the style to dynamic. And now I could right click, copy dynamic color, and I could right click, paste dynamic color on this text here if I needed. So we think copy and paste is going to be a huge boon to your productivity when you're working in the floor plan editor. A couple additional changes on elements. We've added the ability to group elements, so you'll do that over here in the Elements tab. If I want to separate my elements, and this will come into play when we look at states. If I want to add, maybe this is the VAV labels, and then I can just drag and drop my labels into this group. What's cool about this is when I'm doing this, I can just hide the entire group, and it will hide everything under it. And then if I want, I can go in and, let's say I drew a zone here, and I wanted that sort of separate from my labels. I could create a zone group. And now I can sort of classify all of my elements. And again, this will really come in handy when you're working with states. Groups can have groups inside of them. So if I add another group here, I'll just call this, north side. I could bring that into the group here, and then I could add my VAVs there, and then I could show just without the north side in by turning that on and off. So lots of flexibility, lots of options there. Okay, last thing for elements before we get into states and some of the specific things on specific elements. Every element in the past, you could always hyperlink elements outside of arrows. But for images, for zones, for labels, you'd always be able to set a hyperlink. And sometimes that was in properties and sometimes it was in bindings. In this case, though, with 1.5, we've moved everything over to action. And you can set your hyperlink for an action right there. The same way that you did previously in a different tab. But what's really cool in 1.5 is we've added a whole bunch of new action types, and it's why we've created this new tab here to hold all this configuration. So if I click the drop down and I change from a hyperlink, you can see that we've got 4 new action types. We can run an action on a point and we'll select the action, and if needed, we'll specify a value that we want. We can also allow the user to pick from the point action menu, and I'll show you each one of these, but you can specifically set which actions are available. We can also have a click set the state of the floor plan editor, and we can have it display a menu of states that the user can select, and these will make more sense when we jump into floor plan states. But for now, let's just change this from hyperlink to run point action. And now you can see that we need to pick a point to run our action on. And so I could just pick any point here in my station. Maybe we'll just run it on the occupancy command here for floor 1. Once we've picked a point, we can pick which action we want to run. We'll just have it run emergency active. We can give it a custom title if we'd like, and this is how the title will display on the menu. Because we have a hyperlink associated with this label, when the user clicks, they're going to have to decide whether or not to run the action or visit the hyperlink. If there was no hyperlink, the user would click and the action would just immediately run. So I'm just going to type in run command, and we'll call the menu title occupancy. You can also give the hyperlink a title as well, since it will be displayed in a menu, and we'll just write go to VAV. Okay, so now when we jump out of our floor plan editor and we go into the third floor, when I click on our label here, whoops, wrong label, go back. When I click on the right label, you can see that here we've got our sub menu that pops up here that's titled the way we wrote it out. We can click on the hyperlink to go to the VAV itself, or we can click and run a command. And you can see that we just ran an emergency active command on occupancy there. Back to the floor plan builder. If I go back into action and I remove this hyperlink, just to give you a demonstration, now when I go to the third floor and I run, the command just runs. Let's look at the actions menu. So previously we were running a specific action. I should also note, if I find a numeric point here quickly, just want to show you what it looks like if you need to specify a value. So let's do our cooling set point here, and let's say I want to set it to override. You can see here now that I've got a numeric point, I can set an override duration, and I can also set a value here. And so this is always set. Run point action, the values for actions are always set in the floor plan editor. Our other option is to do a point action menu. And here what we can do is we can have a user select between which actions they want to run, and all of those actions will, for this point, will load in here, and you can choose to disable or enable specific actions. So maybe I don't want them to be able to set, only to override and auto. Now when I back out and go into the floor plan, here's my actions. Auto and override are available. Override requires a value from the user, and that familiar action form appears, and the user can set it if they'd like. And there we go. Click again, set back to auto. We get confirmation that those actions have ran. We'll look at the set state and state actions in just a second. First off, let's look at labels. We've got a new option to show status of the point that's being linked in, and that's under the Style tab with the status indicator. And I'm just actually going to jump over to Bindings first and pick a Niagara point and change this to a point that I know has some status changing on it. I think I've got that in my air handler here. Under zone, we should see space temp going in and out of alarm and things like that. So now if I go to status indicator, I can choose dot or icon, and we'll start with dot. You can see that the dot comes in here to the left. You can choose that placement, left or right, here with this drop down. And that's going to show the standard Niagara status color, in this case unacknowledged alarm, for that point. And I'll just jump over here. I know I've got I think the next point on the list is overridden. Nope, maybe it's the following one. Both of those are okay. I'll try one more here. Yeah, it looks like all of them are okay. So you're seeing the status of that there on the left. I'll jump back to space temp here. The other thing that you can do other than dot is you can show an icon. And so again, we're showing the alarm icon on this one because it's okay. When I switch points here, or not because it's okay, because it's an alarm. When I switch points to one that is okay, we're showing the check mark. And the standard icons that we use across all of Reflow to display status, they're colored with the traditional Niagara status colors, things like a user for override, a check mark for OK, same icons you'll see in our table view components and things like that. Of course, all of these things can be copied over by copying the style and right-clicking and pasting style there on this one. So really easy to go in and add those indicators to all of your labels. Okay, next thing is zone elements. So let me pull some of these labels out of the way here, and let's take a look at a bunch of new changes in zones. So when I'm working with an existing zone, a common problem in previous versions of Reflow is if I needed to resize this in some way, maybe I needed to make it smaller to fit this zone, just this one room. Eventually I'd run out of points, and there was no real way to add or remove points, so I'd have to do something like this. That just didn't look very well. So now in Reflow 1.5, you can just hover over the edges of a zone, and you can add a point just by clicking when you see that little add button come up. And so now I can, let's add another one here. I can really add points and resize this to properly fit my needs. So really easy to add points. I can also remove points. So I can just go hover over an existing point, right click my mouse to remove points. Zones are fluid now. You can feel free to duplicate them if they've got dynamic color settings that you like. And then you can add in points as you need, remove points as you need, and get them the proper shape for what you need. Let me jump into adding a zone. So another feature with adding a zone, we still have our continuous mode available up here, but we've added this feature to hide elements or to unhide elements as you're drawing. Previously, this would just happen by default. Now you can uncheck that, and you can see other elements on screen as you're drawing zones. This is particularly helpful if you're using a zone to draw over an image to make a key plan for invisible hyperlinks or things like that. Previously, it would be really frustrating that the image would hide. You would have to sort of do your best guess and then change points around when the image shows again. So really great option there. The other thing to notice is now that I've got the second zone, zones have a hover effect. And so when I hover over one zone, it brightens a little bit, and other zones fade. So you can see which zone is hovered really easily. And you can turn that behavior off in the new layout options here. Just uncheck highlight zone on hover, and now you can see that no longer happens. The other option in the layout options for zones is enable data tooltips. And this is really cool because you can now put a data layer inside of your zones, and you're not forced to potentially use a label to show data on the zone. So if I turn enable data tooltips on, you won't see any changes, but now as I hover, you'll see the zone names here. And so for this zone, I can just rename this to, I'll just change it to offices. It'll put the name of the zone on there, and again, that's just right here. Or I can edit it in the elements area. And then if I've got a dynamic color point connected to this zone, and this option is checked, I'm able to show a point value in there as well. I'll show you that in just a second. The other option here is always visible, so this will make the labels always appear. And these labels are really cool in that they will sort of center themselves as best as they can inside of the zone. So as you're making changes, they'll always sort of be in a good spot and always inside of the zone itself, regardless of how large it is or where it's positioned on the page. All right, I'll uncheck always visible. And let's give this zone a dynamic color. So I'll change this to dynamic. I'll pick, find a point here, my air handlers. Just have the space temp be used here, and we'll just set yellow as a default, green for within deviation, red for above, and we'll leave blue for when it's out of deviation. So now when I hover, you can see that we've got our dynamic color point available and visible to the user. And again, if I were to turn on always visible, you would be able to see it all the time. You can also change those options in a zone specifically. Again, under layout options, you have to enable tooltips, but once you do, you can disable the tooltip for the specific zone. So it's enabled for zone 1, but not for our offices zone. You can also choose to hide the dynamic color value if you'd like. And always visible for a specific zone. So maybe I don't want it visible for zone 1, but I do want it visible for our offices zone. I'm able to do that and control that at the zone level. Okay, next up, let's take a look at the two new elements that are available on floor plans, buttons and icons. These are both really simple elements that you can add, but you can get a lot of additional value out of them. Our button is just a standard button. It comes in a few different size modes. So if you change the text size here, it can grow. And then you can also change font weight to make those sort of appear larger or smaller. You can control the color of the title and the background separately. And then depending on the background color you pick, when you hover over the button, you'll get a subtle lighten effect to the background color. Buttons, of course, can have actions assigned to them, just like any other element inside of the floor plan editor. And then finally, we've got our icons element. Icons can be added and sized to your floor plan as needed. You have access to the entire icon library in Reflow to use and add to your floor plans. They can have dynamic colors as well. So for instance, if you came in here and picked a light bulb to indicate a light was on, you could just pick the bulb here and dynamically color that, yellow if it was on, maybe gray if it was off. So really cool things you can build with these icons. Last thing I want to show you with floor plans is the states functionality. This is super helpful and can give you a whole new dimension to your floor plans. So let me drop this offices back into our zones folder here. And maybe we want to build two different looks into this floor plan where one are temperatures and VAV information, and then the other is sort of occupancy status or maybe a comfort level view. And we don't want them to display at the same time. That's where the new states feature can come into play. So with states, every floor plan is going to start with a base state. And when you only have one state on a floor plan, the users will just have access to that view. If you click into the states tab and you add a new state, and maybe let's just call this comfort level, and we'll call this one VAVs. Now users can toggle between these two states. And the way you make states behave differently is using these, the hide and show icons, or right-clicking and going to hide on elements. So for our VAV state, we just only want to show the VAV labels, and so we'll turn off our zones. And I'm using the group here, and this is where groups can be really helpful. I'm using the group to turn off both zones. And then when I use this drop down to toggle state, or I go over here and click on state, you can see that that's going to change over to our comfort level state where everything is visible. I'll hide my VAVs, and now we just have a state where we've got our zones visible. So toggling between the two states, VAVs without any zones, comfort level with only zones. So how does this look to an end user? So if I open the floor plan, we start on the top state in the list, which we renamed from base to VAVs, and you'll see this new drop down here to select a state. For floors that don't have a state, like my second floor, third or first floor, actually they all have states. For floors that don't have a state, this drop down will not appear, but for floors that do, this drop down will appear, and I can go from VAVs to comfort level very easily. And so the user can do that from right there. Also, if we look at this in mobile, the drop down is a little different. You can see it's right here. The user just needs to tap, select their states, and of course we haven't enabled our zones to display, so those wouldn't appear there. I'll go back to our floor plan builder here. And another thing that you can do with these states is you can control whether or not they're visible on mobile. So if I didn't want to have this comfort level zones display for that mobile user, I can hide on mobile. You can see now it's only available on desktop. And when I dive into the floor here and I look at it in mobile, the states option won't even be there for me to select. The other thing you can do, and I'll just show you what those zones look like on mobile. I'm going to show it on mobile. You can, of course, make things mobile only by hiding the state on desktop and tablet, but I'll just select both of these zones, tick that they're visible on the mobile list, and now when we go into mobile and we switch to comfort level, we can see our zones. Another important thing to know that you can do inside of the floor plan UI with switching states is you can actually use elements on your floor plan to enable the user to switch states. So I'll demonstrate that with by adding a couple button elements here to the top. And we will have this button element switch the state to VAVs. And this button element switch our state to comfort level. Now remember, I'm using the action type set state for this, and this is going to set to a specific state. The other thing I can do, maybe if I want to put an icon in here, and we'll just sort of grab a something that sort of represents a menu. We'll say if the user clicks the menu here, they can choose which state they want to pick, and you'll do that with the state menu here. Okay, so button 1 will switch to VAVs, button 2 will switch to comfort level, and I need to go back in and just sort of fix my states so that zones are hidden on the VAV state, and if I switch over to comfort, okay, so zones are visible, labels are hidden. Okay, perfect. So I'll just also quickly rename these buttons, so we'll call this one VAVs, call this one zones. And now if I switch out and I go to the third floor, I can still switch my states here with the selector, but now my buttons are also working. So I can switch between the two, and if I click on my menu here, I can also switch between the two. So this is a way to put some interactivity into your graphics without making the user come up here to the drop-down. Now, another thing you may want to do if you do build a menu system or a state system inside of your floor plan itself, you may want to come in here and you may not want to have that drop-down enabled. And you can do that in the layout options. So you can do this for both desktop and mobile separately. So if I turn this off on desktop, and I go back and view the floor plan, now that state dropdown is gone, and the only way for my user to toggle states is to use the UI that I created. And then, of course, if I go into mobile, we did not disable it on mobile, still have our selector here on mobile. So we think states is a really powerful system in Reflow. We think it's going to allow you to build some really cool things for your end users, and without having to create extra floors or anything like that to sort of trick the system. We think states is super powerful and are really excited to see what you're going to do with it. Okay, next up we'll be taking a look at the new alarms features in 1.5. So when I click into the alarms configuration, you'll notice this initial menu has changed, and all of those settings that used to be in this menu are now in the default alarm console. So every new station you create will start with a default alarm console, and if you upgrade Reflow to 1.5 from any previous version, all of your settings will be moved into this default alarm console. If I click into there, you can see all of the familiar settings, table columns, class selection, custom priorities. All of these things are now available in this console. And what's great is I can come back here and add a new console and tweak any of those settings either for a specific user or for a specific building. I can also link to these consoles independently, and so it really opens up a whole new avenue of viewing alarms in Reflow. So let me do that. I'm going to add a new console, and I'll give it a name here. We'll just call this Building 1. And in this console, I can do things like disallow acknowledgement or default to UNAC only alarms, change a time range, and of course, give it a custom title. I'll just call it Custom Console. Notice here, just like when I start with a fresh install of Reflow, all of my priorities are set to medium and all classes are available. So I'm just going to hide some of these classes. You can see we're down to 1 now. And I'm going to go in and properly set my priorities. We'll set this one to high, and we'll set this Building C critical class to low. I can also go in and customize labels and colors, all the things that you would expect within a Reflow alarm console. I can drag and move these consoles around, and that's really just for my own organizational purposes. And you can see when I actually click on one of the consoles, we'll get a preview of it over to the right. So 2 different consoles now. Once I've got my consoles built, I can apply them in different places. So I'm able to, under Buildings, and I go to Alarms. Previously in Reflow, I could select by class, but now I can have a new option that allows me to choose a Reflow alarm console. And you can see if I switch this over to the Building 1 alarm console, currently we don't have any active alarms. And so those are showing there. And that'll even pull in the custom title. The other area where I can take advantage of these alarm consoles is in dashboard cards and navigation items. So if I jump over to my landing page, I've got an active alarms card already set up, but you can see that it's using the default alarm console. If I switch that over to Building 1, you can see now we have 0 active alarms, and all of the data for that console is being pulled through. I can also link to these consoles in my hyperlink picker. So I'll want to link to my new alarm console, and as I click in, you can see we're taken there. The other important piece that's been added to alarms in Reflow 1.5 is crucial for memory usage. So we've added an alarm record limit property, and that is on the property sheet of the Reflow service. This is going to limit the number of alarm records that we will parse and send back to the station. This is important because stations with very large amounts of alarm records could start eating up too many resources on the station itself while we process those alarm records. So for instance, if you were to go into Reflow and set your time range for your alarm console to all of last year, and maybe there were 10,000 records or 100,000 records being returned, eventually, unless you have increased your memory settings or you're on a really high power supervisor, this could slow down the station and potentially have a heap issue by returning thousands and thousands of alarms. So this safeguard has been added to make sure that that can never happen inside of Reflow, and you can set that to any number you like. And again, just remember, the higher you bring this up, the more station memory you're going to want to have. We recommend a max of around 2,000 without increasing Java heap size. We've seen it go all the way up to 5,000 and 7,000 before we'll notice issues on a supervisor. But if you need to return any more than that, I would recommend increasing your heap size and potentially allocating more memory to the station itself or to the machine that the station is running on.
Okay, let's dive into histories and take a look at what's new in 1.5. So the biggest thing here is not super visible to users. However, it's a really big impactful change. We've changed our charting renderer. in 1.5. So the library we use to actually draw these charts is completely different now. And it enables a lot of the features that we'll look at, empowers us to do lots of new things and still make the chart experience smooth and performant as you would expect. One of the more obvious changes you'll see in this build are our tooltips. They take up a little less space. They're much more performant, and that they'll move with your cursor much more smoothly, and they'll show data just a little differently. Beyond that, though, all of the charts that you would expect to see, they're all supported. They're all sort of drawn the same way in the same style. So most end users wouldn't even notice that this library has changed. Another change as a result of this is we've moved our export options, and those are now up at the top. They're a little more prominent when you're in the chart view. You still have access to all the same exports, and specifically our CSV export has been updated to where you can now export multiple lines or multiple series of data in a single CSV export, and that feature was requested by many users. Happy to say it's in 1.5, so should save those end users a couple steps when they're trying to export multiple series of data. The other really big change here is the ability to compare between previous time frames. So in this example here, I can just click on my legend, and I can still hide the line if I'd like. Just like in 1.4 and previous builds. But now I can have this other option that allows me to compare to the previous time frame. And because I'm on last hour right now, I'm comparing to the previous hour. And this line here will change based on my time here. I don't have a ton of historical data in this station. Fired it up specifically for this video series, but if I take a look at today versus yesterday, you can see I had the station running in the morning yesterday, and we're comparing against that. And then of course, if I look at the day before, so now I'm comparing yesterday to the previous day, I've got some data in there. So here's where yesterday sort of stops, and here's all my data for the day before. So really easy to compare charts. You can also see up here, this top axis changes and lets me know the date that I'm looking at on the comparison. And I'll just go back to last hour here. The other thing that this new history system enables for the first time are interactive cards on your dashboard. So now we can have interactive history cards with tooltips, the ability to export data, the ability to change time frames right inside of the card, where previously for dashboards you would use spark lines, which are still available to give a glimpse into the history and allow the user to click and access the history and do all this stuff. Now you can do it directly from a dashboard. And I'll just give you a little bit of a bigger view here. If I go to the Raleigh card, and we'll just set it to be double width and double height. Now you can really see how interactive these charts can be. And they support all the same functionality. I can still drag to zoom, can use home to get back to the beginning. Again, export, time range, zoom in and out. So we're sure that you'll have lots of good uses for this in your dashboard, in addition to those Sparkline cards that are still available. Finally, we'll be looking at some additional features in 1.5 that didn't really fit into any of the other buckets. First up, we'll look at subnavigations. So subnavigations previously have only really existed inside of buildings, and you can see them down here at the bottom. So each building will have its own subnavigation. And we've expanded upon this system in 1.4.3 by allowing you to go into a page and assign a subnavigation from a building to a certain page, and so that page could be a part of that building. In 1.5, we now allow you to have a fully custom sub-navigation on a page, and I'll just demonstrate that here in my air quality page. So when I click this little add button here, it's going to take me to create a new sub-navigation. Of course, if I already had one created, it could appear in this drop-down. So we'll go here, and we'll just call this dashboard sub-nav. And I can add my navigations here. Maybe we want to connect two pages. Say we're building a kiosk and we want sub-navigation across the bottom. So I'll call the first one air quality and link to this page. And then I'll go back in, create another navigation item, and link to another page that we've got. So let's send that to energy usage. There we go. So now I've got a fully custom sub-navigation on my page, and I can toggle back and forth. Of course, I will want to go to my energy usage and set it to use the same sub-navigation. And so now I can link between the two. So you can edit these sub-navigations or create sub-navigations rather from inside of a page, but we've also added a spot in our navigation settings where you can manage all sub-navigations. So you'll see all of your sub-navigations for buildings appear here, and you can edit them directly without having to go into the building. You'll also see all custom sub-navigations below. And so here's that dashboard sub-nav that I just created with our two items here. So you can edit those from this one common area, which is super helpful. Okay, next up on the list, a really quick one. We've added a new schedules dashboard card. So I'll just hop over to my landing page and add a card to my dashboard. You'll find it here. It's called Schedules List. This is going to allow you to list out specific schedules from your station in a card and give your users quick access to making modifications. So before I get started here, we'll just call this building A schedules, and I'm going to move this to the top of the list so we can see it a little easier. Just move it next to the map here. And all I need to do is use my drop down or click the magnifying glass and find some schedules and just check them. And I'll hit done. And you can see those have now pulled in. We're showing current status of the schedule, current value, and then the next time the value will change along with its name here. And then, of course, clicking on an item in the table there is going to bring me right to the schedule where I can make changes, save it, and close it out. So really simple card, but super helpful for just pulling some of that information into dashboard cards. All right, I'll delete that for now. Okay, last few things live down here in our settings menu. You'll notice that the settings menu has been reorganized just a little bit. We renamed some of these items to make them a little more descriptive and less wordy. Configuration backup is now just backups. Same thing with options down here. So those are reordered and renamed. We tried to push the ones you use most up to the top, backup and user profiles, and some of the lesser used ones like weather down towards the bottom. When I dive into backups here, a really cool new feature that's super important. If you've ever lost data before, you'll know. Automated backups, super helpful. So what this will do, when you click into it, there's two types of automated backups you can run, and you can keep both of them running at the same time. The two backups are incremental backups and daily backups. Incremental backups will take a configuration backup anytime you make a change, and it'll do that once per hour. So for instance, it's turned on and I have them created here. I'll delete this incremental backup, and then I will just change the title of my site here. So let's just add an exclamation point to what's new. And now if I go into my backups, you can see we've got an incremental backup taken immediately after that save went through. Now, if I were to go back and make any other changes over the next hour, this incremental backup would not take. But at 11:15 a.m. when I made a change, a new incremental backup would be taken, and it would overwrite this backup file. So that's sort of how that works. That's basically going to save your work once an hour as a separate file that you can always go back to. And in some cases, if your config file is super big and you're on a JACE or an Edge device, this may not be preferential, depending on how much resources you've dedicated to Niagara and what else is going on your station. So you can always turn that off if you notice a bit of a slowdown as you're working. But we would recommend always leaving it on. And in our testing, we haven't seen a performance hit from this working. The other option that you have, and incremental is turned on by default, daily is turned off by default. We always recommend running with both. A daily backup is going to run a backup every 24 hours. And this backup sort of piggybacks on our 24-hour timer that will update your licenses for you automatically. So this is going to happen every 24 hours, and that's typically 24 hours after you've started the station. So when the station starts up and the reflow service starts up, we start that 24-hour timer to make a license check, to run a daily backup, to do some other cleanup. And so that's when that's going to occur. It's going to occur on station start, or if you've started your station and reflow wasn't on the station at the time and you drag and drop reflow, the reflow service into your config, it would be 24 hours after reflow was dropped in. So that'll happen every day, and that'll ensure that you've got a solid version that you could back up to. Both of these backups, I think I mentioned it with incremental, but both of these backups overwrite themselves. So there'll only be one daily backup file, and that'll be overwritten every 24 hours. Same thing with the incremental backups. There will be only one backup file, and it will get overwritten every hour as you're saving. Okay, last one to talk about here. So we've got a new option for you in user profiles called config view access. We've got lots of feature requests around, or really just support requests around how do I limit a user from accessing the config view. And so there's a couple approaches we've taken in 1.5 to make sure that only specific users can access the reflow config view, while other users will have access to just the reflow and the redirect view. The first thing that we did to make this work is we've set read permissions on reflow and reflow redirect. So any user who wants to try to access those views will need to have read permissions. And then reflow config has read write permissions. So this reflow config view would not show for a user without read write. So you could set up a user to have, to be RI, so read and invoke, and they would not see this reflow config view whenever they click the view dropdown. So that would be the recommended approach for limiting config view access. There is a step-by-step in our documentation of how to set up roles appropriately to make that happen. And then we also added another feature in case for some reason you need to provide write access to a user, but you still do not want to give them config access to reflow. You can turn on this new option, restrict config view access. And what will happen is when this is turned on, any user who logs into reflow and goes to the config view that does not exist on this list will just be redirected right back to the reflow view. So this is sort of the worst case scenario fallback that you can ensure that only these specific users on this list can ever see the config. And by default, when you enable this, the current user that you're logged in with gets added to the list. That user cannot be deleted. Of course, we wouldn't want to immediately redirect you away from the reflow view and never allow you to change this again. But then you could, of course, add additional users. Just like with user profiles, you can just start typing in users here and separate them by commas and hit add, and now they're added to the list, and deleting them with the little delete icon next. So again, if the user does not exist on this list and this flag is turned on. The user, upon trying to access the config view, it will be visible in their views, but as soon as they try to access this, they will be redirected to the Reflow view. Okay, that about wraps up the new features that we'll highlight in this video. Always remember, you can go to NiagaraModules.com, click on the Reflow product page, and head over to the What's New page to find all of the new features and a complete list of the changelog here on our website. Lots of things we didn't cover here, most of them pretty minor, but there's a few in there that you'll want to take a look at. Of course, our documentation is always available if you need additional information on using any of these new features. And when all else fails, we're just down here in this chat icon. Feel free to get a hold of us anytime. If you want a deeper dive for your team or us to connect, we're happy to do a screen share and go over demo and answer any questions you might have about 1.5 or anything else. So once again, thanks so much for watching, and we'll talk to you soon.